So now, for recording number 3, we'll go to page 92. So, can you guys summarize kind of what was going on? Oh, we had one part of the class read the top, and then another part read the bottom, or no?
No, that was page 100.
Bella and I did. That was
Sorry about that. Wrong neurons going off. So, what can you guys share with us on what's going on page 92, on the top part of that?
So on page 92, they're looking at correlations between soldiers with PTSD and the size of the hippocampus. And they also they did a twin study actually, where one twin was in battle and the other one was not in active duty, and they were looking at the sizes of the hippocampus in comparison to the PTSD of the one that was active duty. To see kind of, they did the twin study to see like, is the PTSD making the hippocampus smaller, or is having a small hippocampus make you more susceptible to PTSD?
So the idea, the summary is, does the size of the hippocampus have something to do with how you're experiencing PTSD symptoms? So how does this relate? Is this cognitive neuroscience, would you say?
I would say yes, because they're looking at how the cognitive processes of PTSD are affected by the hippocampus, and they were also trying to investigate, like, does having PTSD affect your brain structure?
There you go. So that would be exactly the way that if we're looking at size of a brain structure, hippocampus, that's much more on which end? The neuroscience end. And if you're looking at PTSD symptoms, not really so much cognitive as much, problem solving, attention, language, and memory, but still, the idea is structure and function. Now we're looking at size and doing correlations, and what did they find? Were there any major findings here?
So they actually found that both twins had a smaller hippocampus as the PTSD severity increased. So so both twins had a smaller hippocampus, so they concluded that they think that having a smaller hippocampus makes you more susceptible to PTSD.
There you go. So the idea is, and the hippocampus is in what area of the brain? You guys remember where the hippocampus is? It's kind of the memory area of the brain. It's in the limbic system. So the idea of this is not working as well, you're having more emotional outbursts, very PTSD related, and it's kind of that mind-body thing again. Probably not type reductionism, probably just token, because kind of correlations, but this is what cognitive neuroscience people do. They look at the brain and what's going on with the brain, and then they try to look and see if there are correlations, and this is the way of cognitive neuroscience. Any other comments or questions or thoughts from your group about this? Kind of interesting. Have you guys heard of this kind of stuff before? These are kind of some of the techniques of cognitive neuroscience. Okay, so let's turn to page 100 next. So we had, maybe we can start with the bottom part. We had the two groups over here. Event-related potentials, ERPs. What can you guys tell us about ERPs? What are, let me maybe ask our back group with Brittany and Madison, what are ERPs? What do they try to do there?
It's the event-related potential, and it's a tiny signal embedded in the ongoing EEG triggered by a stimulus.
So what do they basically do here to these humans?
They send a stimulus to them to see if it evokes a response.
So they'll put a stimulus into the system. In this case, a sound might be played. And then on the basis of that sound, what will they then collect? They'll collect EEG traces from a specific area of the brain. So they'll basically look, okay, we presented this, and we saw something happening here in the brain. Does this strike us as cognitive neuroscience? Yeah, let's look at this word and let's see what's going on. Or let's look at this sound, see what area of the brain. So this is techniques of cognitive neuroscience. Let's take it for the other side of the class here. What would you guys say about the top part of things here? What are they basically describing there?
It just talks about how the ERP graphs show the EEG waves, and then how their graphs, so the waves will be either positive or negative, and so they'll graph in different ways regarding whether they're positive or negative and how much time it takes for the stimulus to make you have a response.
So how much time it'll take. And so the idea is, if you look in the second column on page 100 on the top, the idea of the N200 wave, or the P300 wave, very much cognitive neuroscience. If you attend to a stimulus, then you'll see a big positive wave at 300 milliseconds. That's about a third of a second. So they look at presenting stimuli and then seeing what's going on inside the brain. So if you take anything cognitively or mentally and then look at what's going on in the brain, that's cognitive neuroscience. So a lot of things with N200s, N100s. I might give you something on the test about this and just ask you, is this cognitive neuroscience? The answer would be what? Yes, because what are they trying to correlate here?
A stimulus with specific brain activity.
Exactly, a stimulus. And if I use the word correlate or a relationship, is that probably going to be more type reductionism or token reductionism?
Type.
Why would you say type?
Because when there's a correlation, there's the tendency to want to associate this one thing with another.
That's kind of true. You're kind of correlating, relating to variables, but it's usually not a causal thing. So usually if it's a correlation of hippocampal volume to X or a wave to Y, usually it's more on that token reductionistic idea. So on a test, if I gave you a question and I asked you something, if you actually said type reductionism, you could still get a fair amount of credit if you really went into detail on your logic. For me, on test, logic gets you a lot of partial credit. If you have the wrong answer, but you have a good rationale for the wrong answer, you can earn up to a B on that situation. So that's kind of page 100 there. So we did that. And then we turn to page 235. Actually, did we finish up? Actually, before we do that, let's actually go back to the beginning of this chapter. I don't think we did that yet. Chapter 3. So, methods of cognitive neuroscience. We'll kind of go through that on what's important for you guys to know. If you look at page 72, once again, they take little rats and they watch what their brains do when they do behaviors. It's very much kind of cognitive neuroscience there. Scientific method. Are you guys familiar with the scientific method? Collect data, look at things, analyze it, have hypotheses, and so forth. Page 75 is kind of a good idea. On page 75, that figure, they kind of have people do things and then they're measuring what's going on in the brain when that's going on. How is cognitive psychology different than cognitive neuroscience? How is cognitive psychology different than cognitive neuroscience? What do we do in cognitive psychology? Does anybody know? Well, we talked a little bit about what cognitive psychologists study.
They describe behavior, observable behavior.
Not quite. It's a good thought, but not quite.
Is it mental activity and how you process information?
Yeah, mental activity. Problem solving, attention, language, and memory. Did we mention that before? Palm. Did we say that in here? So in cognitive psychology, we care about mental activity. Do we necessarily care anything about the brain in cognitive psych? No, but in this class we do. So if you look at what the brain is doing in response to this, kind of goes through some of that. Page 78. You can learn a lot about cognitive activity by studying brain injuries. I had my own traumatic brain accident way back when, but I recovered from that. My daughter actually has epilepsy, and so you can actually learn a lot about electrical activity and doing things in that way. Medicines can kind of do things as well. Then on page 89, they can do studies with stimulation, CAT scans, PET scans. Kind of went over that on page 92. You should be familiar with this. Single cell recordings in animals. Did we talk about an example of that in here? Does anybody remember the example? Hubel and Wiesel, what did they do?
With the monkeys?
With the monkeys, they basically recorded cells, single cells. Oh, this one controls feature detectors and so forth. So that's a method of studying. You can even look at multi-cell units. What else did I underline here? Yeah, we talked about on page 96, receptive fields, areas that are kind of active when you put a line. That was McClellan and Rummelhart. That's you have a visual map to the areas of your brain that's called a retinotopic map. And there's even for acoustics, where there's an EEG study on page 99. They record, actually, page 99, let's look at just for a minute or two. My daughter with her epilepsy, you can look at the various sleep stages. Not really a cognitive thing here, but you can see the brain changing its electrical activity. So you could actually call this cognitive neuroscience. Talked about event-related potentials, PET scans, CAT scans, the whole kit and caboodle is in the rest of that chapter. So you should be familiar with this. Okay, so that kind of covers chapter 3. Those are the main 3 chapters of things. And then what was the last page we wanted to go to here? 235. For 235, they have the term, let me